of every NASCAR Cup Series race. Here are your hosts, Kevin Batstone, NASCARSky, and Jeff Davis.
Hello, race fans, and welcome to a new season of Mash the Gas podcast. I'm NASCARSky, and I'm so excited for my first full season on Mash the Gas. Joining me soon are the longtime hosts Kevin Batstone and Jeff Davis. And we're here to talk about the clash at Bowman Gray and all things about the new NASCAR season that is upon us. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, I have to ask, Kevin, who mashed the gas the hardest?
Sky, such a pleasure to be here with you. So excited to kick off the 2025 NASCAR Cup Series season. Awesome. Bowman Gray was an incredible experience. The cookout clash. Look, we got to get up to the man who took the pole, dominated in practice, led 171 laps. Alan Gufson, Chase Elliott, getting it done. NASCAR's most popular driver coming out of the gate swinging, guys.
And it was a heck of a race. Definitely better than the last two exhibition races we've seen at the LA Coliseum. Really fun seeing these guys trading paint. But yeah, pretty much all night long, it seemed to be the Chase Elliott, the Denny Hamlin showed, leading everything but one single lap. But the one I want to give it up to, man, is Ryan Blaney, man, starting P23 and being able to finish second place was a phenomenal feat. And I think Ross Chastain really got really lucky with him because he started in P17. And then after the break there, he just kept moving right along there with him. But Blaney just got right past him and did a great job. So it was cool, man.
Yeah, I have to say, when we look back at the LA Coliseum, over the last 3 years for what this clash was, moving out of Daytona after so many years, it's such a staple of our sport to kick off the season early in February. We just got done with the Rolex 24. Racing is back. I'm going to have to say I was thoroughly impressed with Bowman Gray and the entire experience. I mean, I thought the fans were fantastic. I thought the racetrack really prepared well, the facility with, the safer barriers and the work that had to go in to get this racetrack ready for Cup Series racing. And it was just so different, the shape of it, the feel of it, them trying to, build it inside an existing football coliseum. This place was built to race at, and, the storm drains on the inside added a layer to it, and the beating and banging, it well exceeded my expectations after what we saw at the LA Coliseum. Sky, I know we were talking a little bit off mic about that, and I think it absolutely, as a race fan, as a short track racing fan growing up in the grassroots, I think it definitely it earned its keep, and I'd like to see it come back next year in 2020.
I 100% agree. I like this style of racing. I like that it's a little different. It's not something we get to see week in and week out. Especially with, the first few weeks of the schedule. It's usually typically super speedway focused. So it's nice to get something smaller in there that can really just get everybody excited for the new season. I really like the racing and just the close proximity of everything. I thought it was going to be a lot more tensions, flaring, some anger, but mostly everyone seemed to hold their cool through the whole thing. So I really enjoyed it. I would love to see it back there again.
Everyone seemed to play pretty nice in the sandbox, I thought, Jeff. I mean, you're obviously going to have guys beating and banging. It's a quarter mile. I mean, that's the only way you're going to get around guys. But you look at Ryan Blaney, and I know you want to speak on this, Jeff. I mean, the guy started 23rd. He got in on that Champions Provisional. There was only one spot that was going to get on the Provisional. The others had to come into the last chance qualifier, which we'll get into here in a sec. But I thought Blaney's performance was clean, came up through the field, and just did not have enough to get around that 9.
But he did have a damn good race. And, I was listening to a little post-race interview with him, and he just didn't have enough juice to get past the number 9 car. And he said, but, I just, when I got going, I just didn't have enough right rear. And I'm like, oh, shit, I'm not going to make this pass, right? And then he said, and I'm not going to bulldog into him and get chased out here with a bunch of pitchforks. So, that was Blaney's thoughts on it. I think he's a class act. He did a damn good job during that race. But I agree with both you guys. That is a definitely better venue to hold the exhibition race on a quarter-mile track. I think turns 1 and 2 had a lot more room. It seemed a lot more narrow in LA. So it did make for better racing. So, I really enjoyed it.
Well, I think Chase Elliott hit on that early on in practice. He immediately came out of the gate. You could just tell. I mean, that was a confident race car driver. Alan Gufson, those guys had this car dialed in. He just said, look, the Coliseum was no good. I think NASCAR kind of learned their lesson with that. Bringing it to an existing quarter-mile track made more sense than trying to replicate or build a temporary track within a Coliseum. I mean, the history that we have at Bowman Gray, first time Cup Series has been there since 1971. We know that they use it for football. They use it for the wheel and modifieds. We got to see, some longtime guys that have been, running the modifieds, had a chance to compete with the Cup guys. So the whole experience I thought was really cool. I have no problem with Bowman Gray being on the schedule again next year. I think I will say this, and I'm sure you guys would agree. We've talked about it with North Wilkesboro as the All-Star race and some of these other venues. I don't quite want to see Bowman Gray as a points race, but I am completely fine with this being a preseason exhibition.
I agree with you there. I feel like it's just a little bit out of the realm of what most of the other tracks are on the schedule. So, but I do like it as like an exhibition, especially at the beginning of the season, get us all excited, get everybody in a small area and just kind of see what storylines are going to make for the season, what drivers are getting into who. And, last year, 2 years ago with Logano and Ty Gibbs, just seeing if anything like that comes to fruition. So I absolutely loved it in the beginning of the year. And I agree. I don't think it should be moved to a points paying race.
Yeah, Sky, and I'd agree with you. It was just really good racing, and everyone pretty much kept their cool. I mean, they knew it was an exhibition race. There wasn't any reason to go to get outlandish. I mean, everyone was out there kind of just having a really good time. So for again, a quarter mile, not having it as a points race, I think is perfect. One thing I still had to kind of adjust to is seeing that 88 car out there, old SVG, old Gizzy out there finishing P9. Because every time I looked over it and I'd see him, it just pops in my mind, Dale Jr. But really cool paint scheme. It was cool to see him get in the top 10.
Pretty good run for our friend down under there, old SVG. Good opportunity with Trackhouse. Those guys expanding now, bringing that 88 car. I'm excited to see what he can do. With his road course experience, I think some of that braking and quarter entry really helped. It kind of fit into his driving style a little bit. Because, I mean, we saw a lot of, left front tire lock up in the heats. We saw it in the last chance qualifier, guys running over each other, really a rhythm racetrack. And I think that's what played into Kyle Larson so well during that last chance qualifier. I mean, the fact that he even had to be, in the LCQ was surprising to me. The 5 car was just a little bit off. I felt like all weekend. Found some speed in the LCQ, made it to the main event. Unfortunately, obviously finished a lap down there in P17, not the night that those guys were looking for. But hey, good opportunity to knock the rust off, like we said, get out there, beat and bang, kind of get the season rolling a bit. New faces, new places. We mentioned 23XI expanding. All these guys are getting a little bit bigger, and it's going to take us a bit, I think, to get adjust to some of these new faces and places, like we were saying, with Josh Berry in the 21, Noah Gragson in the 4. It's going to take us a couple weeks, I think, Sky.
Oh yeah, it's a lot different, especially with that 19 car in Chase Briscoe. My heart keeps thinking it's Truex out there, but I'm excited to see what Chase Briscoe can do, especially with Joe Gibbs Racing. I feel like he's going to be a decent fit there. I feel like he races pretty well along the side the guys that he's there with. It's interested to kind of see how everybody does. No Gragson in the 4 with the front row. Especially SVG, I want to see how he does on ovals. And I have a feeling if he can really crack into oval racing, we might have a problem on our hands with him.
Yeah, he's a damn fine driver, like you mentioned, especially on the road courses and some of these short tracks. So once we get him on a full oval, mile and a half, I think it's going to be that's going to be the point where we know if he's going to be able to run at the cup level really, really well. But I'm excited. I like his attitude. I think he's got a really cool personality. He's always got that smile on his face. Just seems like a happy guy, man. So to see SVG out there, I think is really cool, and it's cool seeing him being over there at Trackhouse, and like you said, see what he can do in the organization and run hard.
It's a huge opportunity for him in that 88 car, no question. Great, great equipment, great teammates with Daniel Suarez and Ross Chastain. I think those guys are going to be a force to be reckoned with again this year. And, you look at the road courses. I mean, look how SVG made it into the Xfinity Series playoffs last year. I mean, it was road course domination, got him pretty deep into the Xfinity playoffs. But you're right, he's going to have to tighten up that oval package a bit. And that's where I see tracks like Richmond and Martinsville and some of these shorter tracks really playing into SVG's driving style. But this is going to be a breakout year for him. And I think a lot of drivers, I know Sky was kind of keeping an eye on some of the things you were posting on social media and kind of kicking the can around. Who do we think is going to get that first Cup Series win this year? I think you said Todd Gillen, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, definitely. I think Todd Gilliland has a really good chance. He really impressed me a lot last year, especially once Front Row Motorsports got it down. And now that he's in the flagship 34, I feel like, he's got to really, put his overalls on, get it together. Like you're the lead, so you're going to have to get a win. I could also see someone like Carson Hocevar. He's someone I think is going to be a force to be reckoned with in the next few years in the Cup Series. I can tell there's a lot of talent there, and, him and Haley and just I don't know. They're doing pretty well. A lot better than I've seen recent rookies do in the past few years.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that as well. I think Hocevar, he's going to do good. I still think he's got a little bit of learning to do, kind of like Ross Chastain did his first year. So, Chastain, he's been doing well. He's been kicking some ass, and I think he's going to do pretty good this year. I think he'll do better than he did last year. But to see Hocevar in the Cup Series this year, I think it's going to be really cool. So, like you're mentioning, a lot of different changes, and it is weird not seeing old Truex in the 19 car. He's out doing some bass fishing on some boat probably now every Sunday.
Well, he's earned that right for sure, and it is weird not having Martin Truex Jr. Full time. We'll obviously see him in a Cup ride here at Daytona, hoping he makes the show, and obviously Helio Castroneves and a lot of interesting characters that are going to be running in this 500. But Carson Hocevar, I think Jeff, you hit the nail on the head. He's a very aggressive guy, and we saw that with Chastain in his younger years, and they took those rookie stripes away this year. They don't have that yellow stripe on that bumper anymore, so it's kind of a free for all out there. And speaking of aggression, we look at Kyle Busch, in the heat races. That's that old Kyle Busch guy that we know and love. That aggression and him getting back there and getting ran on his ass and having NASCAR having a radio down to him. It's like, all right, Kyle Busch is back.
Honestly, I think he needs to bring it back because what he's been doing the last 2-3 years has not been working well for him. I think he's got to feed into that aggression a little bit, kind of make those moves, do those kind of ballsy things that other drivers aren't going to do. I feel like it's definitely going to benefit him a lot. And another driver, we got to mention Ty Gibbs. I mean, what did he do? He ran over the car as he was exiting. His tempers were definitely flared too. So I'm interested to see how he uses his anger and see if maybe he can channel that into a win this year or if it's just going to hurt him.
Well, we look at RCR, and I think those guys have just struggled. Austin Dillon and the 8 of Kyle Busch, like equipment wise, we'll see where they're at this year. The body transformations and some of the things Chevy went through and trying to keep up with Ford and, some of the manufacturer stuff. I just feel like RCR was a little bit behind the ball. So I'll be curious once we get past Daytona, past Atlanta, and get to our meat and potatoes in the mile and a half to see where those guys stack up. And yeah, you mentioned Ty Gibbs. Did he get all 4 tires off the ground when I think it was Ryan Preece that he was dooring there, Jeff. He absolutely just slammed him on the exit there of turn 3. I mean, he came right off the ground.
Yeah, he did. He went airborne. He had all 4 tires off the ground, and which is what I was going to bring up after Sky just mentioned that. If he does that during the season in a regular race, is that going to take away his playoff points if he has any? Is it going to, take him out of the playoffs? And what all does that entail? I mean, if you get taken out of the playoffs, then it's like, well, hell, I guess I can run dirty the rest of the year because there's no consequences for it. Or is it going to make people maybe run a little bit cleaner? I don't know. They're not. What are you guys' thoughts on the rules for the change?
I do think some drivers in certain situations are probably going to be more cautious, but I've been watching the sport for so long and I think some drivers just don't care and you get into the heat of the moment and something happens and you're not really thinking and you're just blinded by anger. I feel like, we're still going to see some boneheaded moves and I'm interested to see how this new rule takes effect this year.
Well, I'm curious to see how it's going to be enforced because a lot of it seems like it's going to be appealed. It could be challenged. It's going to be subjective. We know right rear hooks are a no-go. You can't right rear hook a guy. It's blatantly obvious on retaliation. I think the Clash was a little bit of an exception to that, as we saw coming off turn 4 where that wall kicked out. You were so squeezed coming off that corner that guys were bouncing off each other. And, that was a little bit of a different scenario. But, if you're coming down the back straightaway at, say, Las Vegas Motor Speedway or another mile and a half and you right rear hook a guy, that's retaliative. And NASCAR is going to act on it. They're going to pull your playoff points, possibly suspensions and other things. But I can see it getting into this contingency deal where, the SMT data is going to be crucial to determine, did he actually hook him? Did he turn into him? We saw that with Chase Elliott and Denny Hamlin, a season or 2 ago where that happened and placed on a suspension. Chase got a waiver, got into the playoffs. So I'm curious to see how far does NASCAR enforce this new rule? Is it going to really pull guys out of the playoffs? Jeff, I know you and I were kind of speculating on what this looks like. We mentioned guys getting hurt away from the racetrack. Do they not get a playoff waiver now? So a lot of variables that we haven't seen play out just yet. Until we get into these scenarios, we're going to have to see NASCAR is going to take it case by case, I feel like.
Yeah, and it's going to be very interesting because the other aspect of this is like, Kyle Larson is going to go running for the double again. He wants to do the Indy 500 and the Coca-Cola 600. So, in a situation like last year where he didn't get to run a single lap, that would have kicked him out. So he'd be done. That would ruin it. So obviously this year, if there's any sort of delays, he's going to get his ass right on that plane from Indianapolis and head straight on out to Charlotte because he can't miss it. Because obviously, this is Cup racing. So it's unfortunate that they're kind of putting that in place because, man, you can't take someone like Kyle Larson and just say, okay, hey, you missed a race. You're out there in Indy, so we're taking your playoff points away. So I think that's going to be really interesting to see as far as, whether you get hurt, whether what are they going to consider retaliation? Was it like, that was just, the old, chrome horn, which gave him a little bit of bumper, pushed him out of the way a little bit. And then there's going to be guys who are like, well, no, that was an intentional hook. So I guess it's going to be up to the officials, and it's going to be very hard for them to be 100% consistent with the way they're going to officiate. I don't know.
I just think there's a lot of what if scenarios. I think until it happens, right? I mean, we saw it so many times last year and the year before. We saw it right rear hooks, we know off limits. But what's retaliation? Because we saw a lot of it in the clash. It's non-points race, so obviously we can't really make an example there. We're headed to a 2.5 mile super speedway, so that's going to be a little bit different the way we race there. I really don't see this coming in until we get to the shorter tracks and the 1.5 miles, and these scenarios start to play out where if you get into a guy going into turn 4, spin him out coming off 4, is that retaliation? So that's where I'm curious. Is it black and white, no shades of gray? Where is that fine line, Scott? I mean, how is NASCAR going to enforce this?
The problem is NASCAR has never been good at enforcing stuff like this, and it typically they like to pick and choose a lot on who they're enforcing what on, and I feel like they try to play a lot into I don't want to say politics in a way, but just the politics of racing. They're like, Chase Elliott's like, they're not going to want to penalize him as much as they're going to want to penalize someone who, like, per se, Bubba Wallace or Joey Logano, that they know that that's going to be a positive call if, something negative happens against one of them. I don't have full faith in NASCAR. I mean, hopefully this year they can change my perspective on that, but they've been very shaky in the past. It's just all gray area. It doesn't seem like there's ever a black and white, honestly.
I
You made
appreciate
a really
calling
good
NASCAR out
point.
on that.
Yeah, I feel like calling them out. Yeah, absolutely. Because there is a lot of gray area, and it depends. Like you said, okay, is this against Eric Jones or is this against Kyle Larson? In NASCAR's eyes, well, maybe we won't take it as hard on Kyle because we need him in there, or Chase Elliott, or Joey Logano, Ryan Blaney. These are guys that they want to see him out there, but they want to see him run, and they don't want to take him out of the playoffs for something that's, well, okay, is that gray area or was it, it's going to be tough to see what they do. So yeah, I really hope they call it well, and we're just going to see how it plays out this year. Because I mean, there's a difference between a little bit of retaliation and something that's going to actually hurt the driver, something that's going to really put them into the wall hard. Is that going to be taken into consideration, or is it just now you hooked them and you're done?
There's just too many what ifs there, Jeff. I think we can sit here and spitball all these scenarios, and yeah, I agree with Sky 100%. I think NASCAR does play into favoritism a bit. I mean, when we saw Chase get parked for that one race, they didn't have a choice. I mean, the data was so clear, the SMT data was there that he completely hooked Denny Hamlin. But is it like a Kansas City Chiefs situation? Sorry, Clint Boyer, I'm calling your team out. The refs completely favor the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't want to see NASCAR do the same thing to our most popular drivers.
No, I definitely agree, and it's unfortunate they kind of already do. But you got to think back to, I don't know, NASCAR, I really hope that they can really just get this officiating down, especially, I mean, since they have so many different rule changes, I hope that they can really be like, doesn't matter who it is. And then just, I don't know. It's so tough. I go back and forth on it because really it is such a situation type thing. I mean, you think back to back onto the favoritism, Bowman getting DQ'd last year in the playoffs. I mean, they gave Hendrick and Bowman every chance they could to get that car up to weight. I don't know if it would be someone like, per se, 23XI, if it was Reddick's car, if they would have given them the same amount of chances. And that's where I don't know, it puts a bad taste in my mouth because it's like I want it to be, fair for everybody. I want it, I don't want my driver, because he's statistically not liked, to be on the short end of the stick all the time. Well, Kyle Larson, Bowman, Hendrick, they get all these extra chances. It's just NASCAR needs to get it together, honestly.
Agreed.
I mean, ball and strike calls. That's what we need. We need it to be painted in the sand. If you do this, this is what happens. If you do that, that's what happens. None of this, well, you know, we're going to give them a pass because of this and that and the other. No, it has to be across the board. And I'm hoping that some of these new rule changes, I'm optimistic that this is going to help enforce that. And, look, there's been some positive rule changes too in this offseason. The DVP, we made some adjustments there, which I think Ryan Blaney was very vocal about last year. If you have 4 tires go down and you get, towed back to pit road and you're out of the DVP, that had to go. That rule had to be, completely abolished. Now there's a little bit more leniency there. You can go to the garage, you can change out, a tow link if you need to, and not expire on the DVP because, people say, well, Kev, these guys are 13 laps down. They don't have a chance. But when we're talking about, a sport of points and how important points are, 6, 7 positions on the racetrack is crucial. So that's why I am in favor of this new DVP policy.
I agree. I absolutely love that, and that the DV it needed to be changed 100%. Especially we've seen that, especially at the end of the year. I mean, there was 3 or 4 different instances in the last few races where it was really brought it to everyone's attention. One rule that I'm definitely, and I don't quite know it verbatim, but one rule that I'm a little iffy on is the rule where if you're established in another racing discipline, you can just come over and you're automatically qualified in to Haleo for the example for the 500, and then you have people like Martin Truex Jr. who have done a lot for the sport. They still have to race their way in, and then you're gonna disqualify Kyle Larson if he stays and does the Indy 500 next year. To me, it's just it almost is like they're not trying to help the sport. They're like, oh, if you're from a different racing discipline, you're good. Oh, but Kyle Larson, you can't go to another sport and race because we're going to take all your points away. Some things make sense, but then other things don't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, that provisional rule, I'm kind of thinking it's bullshit because, like you said, Castronova is coming in from Indy. I know he's a great driver, but for him to be automatically, okay, you are in, okay, and their point is, okay, if you're, a legend in the sport or, a seasoned veteran of any type of racing, you can come on in and get in no matter what. Now, if he does qualify in, there's only going to be 40 spots. But if he doesn't qualify in, he'll start P41. So he would be the only person that would make that to where there were 41 cars in the field. But if you're going to say, okay, hey, this guy's a legend in the sport, look at, like you said, Martin Truex having to race his way in with Tricon Racing. Jimmy Johnson, hell, he's got 7 titles. I would consider him a legend of a sport for motorsports. So, why does he have to maybe not be able to race his way in? If he doesn't get the top 40, he's out. So I don't know. I kind of think it's kind of a bullshit rule. Again, we're getting into where there's gray area with NASCAR, and it's like, I don't know. I don't think it's fair to some of these guys that if they wanted to race, even though, Jimmy Johnson had a terrible year last year with the races that he did run. And so far this year, he's only announced the Coca-Cola 600 and the Daytona. I don't know if he's going to be doing any other racing or not, but those are the only 2 for now. But why shouldn't he be in there automatically?
Yeah, I agree 100%. And, Denny Hamlin talked about it on an Actions Detrimental earlier today. Basically, he came out and said, quote, NASCAR is desperate. This is a desperation move to try and lock in these big name drivers from other areas. We could see, I mean, who knows? You got Julio Castroneves coming in, which is cool. I have no problem with that. I'd like to see him race his way in. We saw Travis Pastrana have to race his way in a few years ago. We've seen guys have to race their way in. And look, the old NASCAR champions provisional would guarantee someone like Truex, someone like Jimmy Johnson, a spot in the Daytona 500, our crown jewel. Derek Cope, Michael Waltrip, guys that have won this race in the past, they were always guaranteed a spot. And so I don't think it's favoring our NASCAR community as much as it is trying to pull ratings and excitement from other sports. I understand what NASCAR is trying to do. I think Steve Phelps does a good job representing our sport, but I think that at some areas we got to tighten it up and protect the sanctioning body of NASCAR.
I 100% agree. And actually, speaking of Denny, I wanted to touch on him and his lack of sponsors this year. I mean, losing FedEx alone. I mean, that is so interesting to me. I feel like I've always remember the 11 FedEx on the track growing up. It's interesting to see that gone. I mean, to see his hauler mostly empty, it makes me wonder kind of what is in store for Denny. I mean, is he going to stick around Joe Gibbs Racing? If I'm not mistaken, I think his contract maybe goes into the end of 2025. I think it was an undisclosed amount of time. It just makes you wonder, is he staying at Joe Gibbs? I mean, we've seen the same thing. He just got his crew chief taken away and switched around, which we've seen the same thing happen with Kyle Busch. It's just interesting. It makes me wonder where Denny Hamlin's going to be in the next few years.
It is concerning for sure. And I think, he addressed it with Bob Pockrass and he said, in so many words, he said it's more of a Joe Gibbs racing problem than it's a Denny Hamlin problem because we know 23XI is his entity. That's what he's building with the Jordan brand and some of the sponsors that they have over there. But Denny drives for Joe Gibbs, and that's where his focus is. And Sport Clips is a secondary sponsor, and there's a lot of open area on that trailer. Look, we saw Jimmy Johnson go through this when he lost Lowe's as a primary sponsor, and then Ally Financial came in, which ultimately ended up moving to Bowman. It's going to be tough. Look what happened when M&M's left Kyle Busch. Well, shortly after, Kyle Busch was no longer with Joe Gibbs Racing. You lose these big time sponsors of over 20 years, Jeff. As we know, it's extremely difficult to pull in these sponsorship dollars, especially in this tough economy right now. A lot of these big corporations do not want to be a primary sponsor in NASCAR. It's millions and millions of dollars. And, I think when you look at someone like FedEx, obviously, this was a move that they made strategically going, we're not really seeing a return with Joe Gibbs Racing. We're going to have to pull out of this. Lowe's the same thing, 7 championships and Lowe's still pulled out.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there because I was going to mention the same thing when it came up with Kyle Busch. Once he lost that Mars and M&M sponsorship, and that takes a lot of dollars, and he is still the number one highest paid driver out there in the field. But him not winning a single race and what's been going on there. So yeah, and Sky, she was right. Denny, he's got the end of 25. We don't know what's going to happen next year. Is he going to roll over to 23XI, take a management role, or he's a part owner obviously, but be involved there, or is he going to race for 23XI? But I did really see a comparison between the 11 car and then old Kyle Busch from last season. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with both of those drivers because they're both at an age now where retirement is not out of the question. I mean, I think they're both 39 years old if I remember correctly, but who knows what's going to happen between the 11 car. He's a damn good driver. I think he's really great in the sport. He kind of took over that love him or hate him, kind of like Kyle Busch did a number of years ago, and now Kyle's kind of calmed down and stuff. But Denny's one of those personalities out there, and I love it. I love it in there. But to see that announcement last week where he's got a 4 race deal with Hawaiian sweet rolls or something like that, they made it sound like it was like this huge announcement and everything. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, it's only 4 races. It's not like I've got FedEx running the entire year pretty much.
There's going to be a lot of adversity, I think, for JGR to overcome with that. I mean, it's the season's here, I mean, yeah, you might get a one-off deal. You might get a, like you just mentioned, the Hawaiian sweet roll 4 race deal here or there, but to not have, that longevity. Look, we saw this with Kyle Larson. The difference was when Larson came in, to Hendrick Motorsports back after his oopla, HendrickCars.com was an easy deal. Rick Hendrick had that in his back pocket. Boom, slap it on the car. And really, that's been Kyle Larson's main form of sponsorship over these last few years. Won a championship with him. Joe Gibbs Racing doesn't really have that in their back pocket. So, is there a possibility that we see the 11 car for a major NASCAR team show up with a blank hood? It could happen.
It could happen. And the one thing I did love about the Kyle Larson sponsorship with Hendrick Cars is, Rick Hendrick, he did have that in his back pocket for sure. And I knew he was going to start him out that way. He was just coming back into racing after his suspension. Didn't know if, at the time, no one wanted to touch him. No one was like, oh man, this guy's taboo. I don't want to put our money behind him as far as, endorsing our products. And then after winning a certain amount of races, they had sponsors knocking on the door, and Mr. H kind of gave him the finger. He's like, nah, Hendrick.com is going on every single one of his cars. So, hey, I guess it comes down to the talent. And if you've got the money to do it like that, which Mr. H does.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that it's happening to Denny Hamlin, especially with the impending lawsuit that is happening. I think it really kind of is, how do I word this? Like something that is favored on Denny's side or like the team side of the podcast to kind of prove like, I'm pretty sure Denny said this to Bob Pockrass, like sponsorship dollars aren't flowing in like they used to. Like, the whole lawsuit is they got to cut the pie different. The teams need help. I've mentioned it many times, but if Hendrick Motorsports, one of the most prestigious teams that have Kyle Larson and William Byron, who constantly are winners, and they're not making a profit, I mean, something's got to change. So I do find it interesting that it's Denny that this is happening to, and I think that in a way he's probably like, this helps my case.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because look, there is politics playing into this. We've seen the charter team lawsuit with Michael Jordan and NASCAR and 23XI, and what that's looking like. If you're a major time sponsor, you're looking at this going, well, I don't know if I want to get my money involved in that mess right now. So a lot of what ifs up in the air. You mentioned it's a contract year for Denny. He's going to go out and race hard. I mean, Denny just wants to win races. We know that. I don't think he's just going to ride around out there and Sunday drive it. He's going to go out and try to win his first championship, and that's going to be tough to do without those sponsor dollars. But I think Denny is in a position like Tony Stewart was with Stewart Haas Racing years ago, where he can go drive for himself if he needs to, you know, or, look, Denny's going to be 45 years old this year. Is he at that age, where he says, well, maybe this is it? He hasn't announced any sort of retirement plans. I don't see that happening for at least the next 2-3 years, but I think Denny at least is in a position where he has some options. He's not necessarily in a Kyle Busch situation where he, is desperate to go to RCR, is in, a dire straight situation where he'll take anything he can get, ultimately landing at RCR. I think Denny's in a position where he can kind of control his destiny a bit. And if things go sideways and they have to fold that 11 car or whatever they have to do, we know there's a lot of drivers in TRD that are coming up, and Joe Gibbs Racing is bringing up talent through the Xfinity Series. He'll easily be replaced. I mean, that's the thing, is you're replaceable now in this NASCAR Cup Series world. They want these young guns. Get out with the old, bring in the new sponsorship. They want the dollars, Jeff.
Yeah, it is. It's all about the money, and Sky's right. I think there's some politics being played into it as far as, who's got the money and who's going to get it and put it where. There's certain teams that are lucky to have enough money to be able to do this a lot and put a lot of money into their cars. But, like Sky was mentioning, this pie needs to be cut a little bit different with NASCAR. I think NASCAR is being a little greedy with their funds as far as their total dollars that they get from, hell, we're going on how many different channels are we now watching races on? 4 or 5 different channels that we're going to have to tune into every week. And hey, by the way, Kevin, didn't you mention earlier something about the practice and qualifying is going to be on Amazon Prime?
Yeah, I was looking at the broadcast partner timeline here. Obviously, we know that Amazon Prime is going to carry some Cup Series races, but I think it's important to underline, if you're a practice and qualifying person like we all are, especially with fantasy, Amazon Prime is going to be carrying practice and qualifying from now until July. The only exclusions to that is going to be Daytona 500 front row qualifying and practice and the Coca-Cola 600. So our 2 crown jewels between now and July will all be on Amazon Prime. So, for a lot of folks, that's kind of a big deal because not everyone pays for Prime. Now you're going to these stream services. I personally talk to guys that have been watching NASCAR over 35 years and they're like, I'm not getting it. I'm not doing Prime for that. And so I'm curious to see what it's going to do to the viewership. We know the world's changing. We know it's going to, a stream kind of world. We got, Max is now going to be doing the in-car cameras, which I think is cool. I think that they're a big player in it. But we know that NASCAR shines when it's on NBC over the air, regular, or Fox over the air. That's when we pull the biggest numbers. So, we've seen the NFL try some Netflix streaming. We've seen, big events going to streaming now. This is just the way the world's going. So I think NASCAR is trying to make a strategic move, to set us up for how we're going to broadcast over the next 10 years.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, is it definitely a little bit annoying for sure, but I feel like NASCAR, they kind of had their hand forced in this because just the way everything's going nowadays. I mean, I haven't had cable in the longest time. I can't even tell you the last time I've probably even watched cable. So I definitely understand where they're going, although it does suck that it's on like 19 different streaming services because, oh my gosh.
I don't want to have to pay for that many damn channels. I really don't. So it's going to be tough, and especially like Kevin was mentioning, if you're in watch or doing the fantasy leagues, you want to watch practice, you want to watch qualifying, and I want to see it for every single race. I don't want them picking and choosing, the tracks last year is like, oh, we're not doing practice, or, qualifying they'll do, but there's no practice at all. And one thing, even with the exhibition race that we've had for the last few years, I'm still kind of old school where I like that full week that we would have at Daytona, and have the clash, have the exhibition, have the practice, have the qualifying, and give them a full week to get ready for that Daytona 500. But that's just me. I'm a little bit of a dinosaur, so I'm having to get used to all this stuff.
You might be older than me, Jeff, but I've been watching this sport since 1994. So I've seen a lot of things come and go. And Speed Weeks was a huge part of Daytona. We would get down there, this week, and we'd be there for 2 weeks straight. And look, I think we still have some Speed Weeks coming up. We got front row qualifying coming up on Wednesday, the 12th. We got the duels. We roll into, Xfinity, the trucks, the ARCA, and then right into the Daytona 500. But yeah, I mean, it's a little bit different now than it used to be, Sky.
I mean, I definitely love the Clash and everything at Daytona. My only issue now with the Clash being at Daytona is the amount of just carnage and wreckage and wasted good equipment and money that comes with, just Daytona racing in general. That's why I like Bowman Gray or something short track, something like that. Cause it's not like you're just wasting millions of dollars. Cause that's what it feels like anymore with these super speedways is that it's no longer about luck or it's no longer about skill and it's just about luck and surviving. And I just hate to see the teams are already, financially strained so much. I just hate to see that continue.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. You're right. There's a lot of money that's wasted at these super speedways, and it's taken a lot of the fun out of the racing. I remember, back when Dale Jr., no matter where he qualified, he'd drop down to the very back and sit there and just slack until about 40 laps to go, and then we'd actually start racing. So it'll be interesting to see. Yeah, I agree. But there's too much money being torn up at those super speedways.
That's ultimately what it came down to. I mean, we had 7 practice sessions, the duels, qualifying, the clash. There was a lot going on in Daytona, and I think it came more from a financial perspective on making that strategic move. But look, the crown jewel is coming up, guys. I mean, the Daytona 500 is our Super Bowl. I've been very vocal over the years. I'm not the biggest super speedway racing fan, but you got to respect Daytona, and Kyle Busch, this will be his 20th year going for it, 20 years of trying. Heard old Mike Joyce say that when Dale Earnhardt Sr. Won it. I'm going to go with Kyle Busch. Kyle Busch is my pick to win the Daytona 500. I think that's a crazy pick, but we know crazy things happen at Daytona. I mean, we see guys win at Talladega, Daytona, all these super speedways. Kyle Busch gets it done on his 20th attempt.
I definitely can agree with you there. I mean, he almost won Daytona last year, the fall race, or the summer race, I guess. So I could definitely see him doing it. I don't know. I feel like it's probably gonna be like Denny Hamlin again. Honestly, I feel like he's just got it up his sleeve one last time.
Well, I know we're getting short on time, but I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to go with Ty Gibbs.
Well, you're going to go Ty Gibbs for the Daytona 500. All right, I like that.
I am, man. I am, just because like we were saying, it's a lot of luck in this race. It doesn't take all skill, so it's not going to be those top drivers every single time. It takes one wreck to get the big one out there, and 20 cars are gone quickly. So I'm going to go out there with Ty Gibbs.
It's a game of survival for sure. We know that it's a long, grueling race. We got a lot coming up. Obviously, with front row qualifying, with the duels, with kicking off everything. We will be back 2 weeks from tonight to break down all of the action from Daytona. So excited to be kicking off Mash the Gas with you guys this year. I mean, that was such a short off season, and we're back racing. I couldn't be more excited. Be sure to follow us on all social media platforms across the board at Mash the Gas. Scott, you're doing some cool stuff with iRacing. Go ahead and get your plugs in there.
Yeah, you can find me on iRacing. My name is Skylar Twig. Definitely add me and we'll get some racing there. And you can always find me at NASCARSky pretty much on every platform across the way. X, TikTok, Instagram, the whole 9.
Right on. It's going to be a very exciting season, and we're very glad to have Sky joining us for this full year and moving onward. Going to be a great, fun year this, you guys. So until next week, Sky, what do we do?
Smash the gas.
I feel the sweat.